It's a little like the Mona Lisa.
Mona Lisa.
It is the icon of the Egyptian identity.
For over 3,000 years, one of the most famous faces in human history kept a secret.
Nefertiti, but have we received, for example, the crown of Friedrich der Grosse or a painting for Albrecht Dürer? I don't think we have.
It sat in plain sight, displayed in a glass case, photographed millions of times, studied by scholars, admired by visitors from every corner of the world.
Symmetry, the slenderness of the face, the long neck, this incredibly well-proportioned mouth.
It became the face of ancient Egypt, the symbol of beauty across civilizations, the most recognized artwork ever recovered from the ancient world. And the entire time, it was hiding something. In 2007, a team of medical researchers did something that had never been done before. They placed the Nefertiti bust inside a hospital CT scanner, the same cutting-edge technology used to detect cancers and map the human brain. And they looked inside. What they found stopped them cold.
It's just a matter of when and who will have enough courage to correct the mistakes of the past.
Beneath the flawless painted exterior, beneath the smooth cheekbones and the sculpted blue crown and the legendary smile, there was another face, a completely different face, carved in stone, hidden inside, and it had been there all along. But here is the part that truly stunned the scientific community. The differences between the two faces were not accidental. They were not the result of damage, deterioration, or a sculptor's mistake. The changes were deliberate, precise, and intentional. Someone had transformed one face into another and sealed the original version inside forever.
I think it's an absolute masterpiece, and certainly timeless.
The question that has fascinated historians ever since is not just what was changed, it is why. Stay with us, because what we are about to unpack is one of the most extraordinary discoveries in the history of archaeology. A discovery that forces us to ask whether the most famous face of the ancient world is actually the face of a woman who ever truly existed, or the face someone decided the world should see instead. The queen behind the crown. Before we get to the scan, we need to understand who Nefertiti was, or more accurately, who she might have been. The name Nefertiti translates from ancient Egyptian as "the beautiful one has come." It is a name that has proven remarkably prophetic across the centuries, but in her own lifetime, Nefertiti was far more than a symbol of beauty. She was one of the most powerful women in the entire ancient world. She was the great royal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, who ruled Egypt during the 14th century BC. That places her somewhere in the period between approximately 1353 and 1336 BC, a reign that was unlike anything that came before it or after it. Akhenaten was, by almost any measure, the most radical pharaoh in Egyptian history. He dismantled the traditional religious order of Egypt almost overnight, abolishing the worship of the old gods and replacing the entire system with devotion to a single deity, the Aten, represented by the sun disk. It was a revolution that shook Egyptian society to its foundations. Temples were abandoned, priests were stripped of their power. The royal court physically relocated from Thebes to an entirely new city that Akhenaten built from scratch in the desert, a place called Amarna, and Nefertiti stood at the center of all of it. Unlike most royal wives of the ancient world, Nefertiti was not simply a consort. She appears in official artwork with a prominence that is almost without parallel in Egyptian history. She is shown performing rituals that were traditionally reserved for the pharaoh. She wears the double crown. She strikes enemies in battle. In some temple carvings, she appears on equal footing with Akhenaten himself. Some historians have gone further, suggesting that Nefertiti may have actually ruled Egypt in her own right after Akhenaten's death, either as a regent or as pharaoh under a different name. That debate has never been fully resolved. What we do know is this: Nefertiti was exceptional. She was powerful, politically significant, and almost certainly a major force in one of the most turbulent periods in ancient Egyptian history. And then, somewhere around year 12 of Akhenaten's reign, she simply vanishes from the official record. We do not know why. We do not know what happened to her. We do not even know with certainty where she is buried. What we do have is the bust, and for more than a century, it has been the single most powerful image of this remarkable woman. The face the world knows, the face that defined her legacy. But is it really her face? The discovery that started everything. To understand the mystery, you need to understand how the bust was found. On December 6, 1912, a German archaeological expedition led by Ludwig Borchardt was excavating the ruins of Amarna. The city had been abandoned abruptly after Akhenaten's death, when his successors moved quickly to dismantle everything he had built. Temples were torn down. His name was erased from monuments. The capital was relocated, and the city of Amarna, barely 2 decades old, was simply left behind. Buildings were sealed, workshops were locked, objects were buried beneath sand and rubble, and they stayed there, unseen and untouched, for more than 3,000 years. Borchardt's team was working in a section of the ruins identified as the studio of a royal sculptor named Thutmose. Based on the evidence found at the site, Thutmose appears to have been the chief artist of the royal court, a figure of considerable prestige. His workshop was extraordinary. It contained unfinished statues, molds, carvings at various stages of completion, and most intriguingly, a collection of plaster face casts that appear to have been taken directly from living subjects. These casts are remarkable in their own right. Unlike the idealized formal images associated with most ancient Egyptian art, they show real human faces with asymmetries, natural textures, signs of age. They look like actual people who sat in that studio and had their faces cast in plaster. They look almost modern. And then, in a storage area beneath layers of sand and collapsed debris, Borchardt's team found it. The bust of Nefertiti. The location of the discovery tells its own story. This was not a royal tomb. It was not a temple or a palace. The bust was found in the very workshop where it had been created, which means it almost certainly never reached wherever it was originally intended to go. It had remained in Thutmose's studio from the moment it was finished until the moment the city was abandoned. And it stayed there, completely undisturbed, for more than 33 centuries. Borchardt recorded the moment in his diary. According to his account, he was so overwhelmed by the object that he struggled to describe it in words. "You have to see it to believe it," was the essential sentiment he committed to paper. What happened next would ignite a controversy that continues to this day. Under the archaeological agreements of the time, excavated finds from Egypt were divided between the discovering team and the Egyptian authorities. Critics, including Egyptian officials who have argued the case for over a century, claim that Borchardt deliberately downplayed the bust's significance during this division process. The allegation is that he described it as a painted plaster artifact, rather than the extraordinary limestone masterpiece it actually was. Had Egyptian officials understood its true value, the argument goes, they would never have agreed to let it leave. German authorities have consistently rejected this account. They maintain that the process followed all agreed protocols and that Egyptian representatives had full opportunity to inspect everything before any decisions were made. The bust left Egypt in 1913. It arrived in Berlin, and it has stayed there ever since. Egypt has formally requested its return multiple times, in 2003, in 2011, and on several occasions in between. Germany has refused every time. The bust currently sits in a purpose-built display room inside Berlin's Neuss Museum, arguably the most famous single object in Germany. But the political debate, as intense as it is, was never the deepest mystery surrounding this object. The deepest mystery was inside it, what the scans revealed. As early as 1992, researchers had attempted to look inside the sculpture using early scanning technology. The results were tantalizing, but frustratingly incomplete. The images were sufficient to confirm that the bust had a more complex internal structure than anyone had assumed, but the technology of the time could not produce the detail necessary to understand what they were actually seeing. Scientists knew something was there. They just could not tell what. That changed in 2007. Dr. Alexander Huppertz was granted permission to examine the bust using a modern 64-slice spiral CT scanner. This is not a primitive or experimental device. It is the same technology deployed in leading hospitals worldwide to detect cancers at their earliest stages, to examine the structure of blood vessels, and to produce detailed three-dimensional maps of the human brain. When it is pointed at a sculpted head, it can resolve details down to fractions of a millimeter. The scanning team knew they might find something significant. They were not prepared for what actually appeared on their screens. As the three-dimensional image assembled itself layer by layer, it became clear that the limestone core of the bust was not a rough framework beneath a decorative shell. It was a complete sculpture in its own right. A fully realized portrait, carved with the same precision and attention to detail visible on the exterior. The eyes were fully shaped, the nose was fully formed, the mouth, the cheekbones, the chin, the contours of the neck, all of it was there, completely rendered in stone, hidden beneath the outer surface. There was a second face inside the bust. Now stop and consider what that means. Not a rough draft, not a structural support. A finished, detailed, expressive portrait, sealed completely out of sight, known to no one, untouched for more than 3,000 years. And then researchers began to compare the two faces, because here is where it becomes extraordinary. They were not the same. The differences that changed everything. The variations between the limestone portrait inside and the stucco exterior visible today are not dramatic, they are subtle. But once you understand what they mean, they become impossible to dismiss. The first difference is around the mouth. The inner limestone face shows faint lines at the corners, the kind of natural lines that develop on a human face over time, tiny marks of expression and age. In the outer surface, those lines are completely gone. The stucco has smoothed them away entirely, leaving a surface that is flawlessly unlined. The second difference is the nose. The limestone portrait beneath the surface features a slight but visible bump along the bridge, a natural human imperfection, the kind of feature that makes a face feel real and specific and individual. In the outer version, that bump has been eliminated. The nose has been refined into a perfectly straight, geometrically elegant shape. The third difference is the cheekbones. The inner portrait shows a natural facial structure. The outer version has enhanced them, lifting them slightly, making them higher, sharper, more dramatically defined. And here is the detail that particularly struck researchers. The stucco coating is not evenly distributed across the surface. In some areas, it is thicker than others. This is not consistent with a sculptor simply covering a stone base with a protective layer. It is consistent with a sculptor deliberately reshaping specific features, adding material exactly where the face needed to be altered. This was not accident. This was craft. This was intention. When the findings were published, Egyptologist Zahi Hawass, one of the world's most prominent figures in the study of ancient Egypt, offered a measured interpretation. In his view, the sculptor first created a realistic portrait in limestone, capturing the queen's natural features with considerable accuracy. He then applied the stucco layer and used it to refine selected details, bringing the final image into closer alignment with the beauty standards of the period: smoother, younger, more idealized. If Hawass is right, then the face admired by millions of visitors every year is not, technically speaking, a portrait. It is a perfected portrait. But that explanation raises an immediate and deeply uncomfortable question: the mystery that will not go away. Think about the artistic world in which this bust was created. The Amarna period, the reign of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, is actually celebrated among art historians for something quite specific: its realism. Compared to the formal, rigid conventions that had governed Egyptian art for centuries before, Amarna artwork feels unusually human. Royal family members are depicted embracing each other. Children appear as children, rounded, playful, full of natural movement. Even Akhenaten himself is shown with elongated features, narrow limbs, and a distinctive physical appearance that historians have debated for decades. Whether those features were stylistic choices or reflections of real physical characteristics, they were clearly meant to convey something specific and personal. Amarna art leaned toward the human. It moved toward showing people as they actually were, or at least as they actually felt. And yet the Nefertiti bust, created in this very period, in this very city, by a sculptor who clearly possessed the skill and the inclination toward realism, ultimately presents a face that is almost impossibly perfect. The outer face does not carry the characteristic exaggerated features of Amarna royal art. It lacks the elongated skull, the dramatic proportions, the stylized particularity that marks so much of the artwork from this period. Instead, it presents a face of balanced, elegant, almost timeless beauty. A face that aligns with modern ideas of attractiveness in ways that feel almost engineered. The hidden face, by contrast, is different. The limestone portrait underneath has the subtle lines, the natural asymmetries, the specific imperfections that connect it to the spirit of Amarna realism. It feels like a face from the ancient world. It feels like a real person, so why conceal it? Why carve a realistic portrait in stone and then seal it away beneath a modified, idealized version? Some historians have offered an answer that carries significant weight. Egyptian royal art was never simply a record of what someone looked like. It was a communication of power, authority, divine status, and political message. The image of a ruler was not documentation, it was projection. And in that context, the inner face may represent reality, while the outer face represents what the court of Akhenaten wanted the world to believe. The famous bust, on this reading, is not a portrait, it is propaganda. The smooth skin, the flawless nose, the elevated cheekbones. These are political choices, not artistic ones. Not everyone accepts this interpretation. Some researchers argue that the explanation is far simpler and far less dramatic. Working in limestone and working in stucco are genuinely different artistic processes. Limestone carving naturally produces a texture with slight irregularities. Stucco application naturally produces smoother, more refined contours. What looks like deliberate image manipulation may simply be the normal transition from a rough stone foundation to a polished, finished surface. On this reading, there is no propaganda. There is no political motive. There is only a sculptor doing what sculptors do, roughing out a form in stone and then finishing it in a more pliable medium. And here is what makes this debate so fascinating. Both interpretations are entirely plausible, and we cannot rule either of them out. The woman we cannot know. What makes the mystery of the hidden face so profound is that it exists within a much larger and more troubling absence. We know remarkably little about Nefertiti as a person. There is no diary. There are no letters written in her hand. There are no first-person accounts from people who knew her. No contemporary descriptions of her character or personality. We have no autobiography, no memoir, no personal testimony of any kind. Almost everything we think we know about Nefertiti comes from images. Carvings, reliefs, statues, official representations created within the highly controlled context of royal art. Every image of her was produced by someone else, for purposes defined by the court she inhabited, according to conventions shaped by a tradition of representation stretching back centuries. And among all those images, across everything that has survived the collapse of the Amarna period and the 3 millennia since, none has exercised more influence over how we understand Nefertiti than the famous bust. For more than 100 years, it has shaped the world's idea of who she was. It has defined her beauty. It has defined her presence. It has become, in a very real sense, her identity. But if the outer face was intentionally modified, if the image the world has taken as Nefertiti's true likeness was in fact a constructed, adjusted, politically curated version of the real woman, then what we have been looking at may be precisely the version of Nefertiti that was least faithful to her actual appearance. We have spent a century admiring an image that was designed to be admired. And the real face, the face that was carved first, the face with the slight lines and the natural nose and the unenhanced cheekbones, was sealed inside a sculpture in a workshop that was abandoned, forgotten, and buried for 3,000 years. There is something genuinely haunting about that. The salt mine, the Cold War, and the museum. The bust story after it left Egypt in 1913 is almost as remarkable as the mystery concealed within it. For years after its arrival in Berlin, the sculpture was kept out of public view, held in a private collection. It was not until 1924 that it was first put on public display. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Newspaper coverage praised its beauty in terms that bordered on reverence. Visitors packed the gallery. One major publication declared it the most lifelike work ever recovered from ancient Egypt, which, in light of what we now know about the hidden interior, takes on a deeply ironic quality. The bust's survival into the modern era is not a certainty that should be taken for granted. During the Second World War, as Allied bombing campaigns targeted German cities, museum collections across the country were placed in emergency storage. The Nefertiti bust was packed up and moved deep underground, into a salt mine in Thuringia. There it remained until the war ended, protected, undamaged, unknown to the conflict raging above it. After Germany's defeat, the fate of cultural objects became deeply entangled in the politics of partition. The bust eventually came to rest in West Berlin, where it was displayed in the Egyptian Museum during the decades of the Cold War, while other related artifacts from the Amarna collection remained separated behind the political barriers of East Berlin. German reunification in 1990 allowed those divided collections to be slowly brought back together. The bust now occupies the centerpiece of the Neues Museum, a room designed specifically for it, in a building painstakingly restored in part to provide a worthy setting for this single object. And still, Egypt asks for it back, in 2003, in 2011, and beyond. And still, Germany says no. What we know and what we cannot know. In the years since the 2007 CT scan was published, scientists have continued to study the bust with extraordinary precision. Researchers have analyzed the pigments used in the painting, identifying specific color compositions that provide information about both the materials available to ancient Egyptian artists and the methods used to apply them. They have mapped the thickness of paint layers in individual sections down to fractions of a millimeter. They have produced three-dimensional digital models of both the inner and outer faces that allow comparison in ways not possible with the naked eye. We now know more technical information about this particular sculpture than about almost any other object from the ancient world. We can describe its construction in remarkable detail. We can trace the sequence of its creation. We can identify where the stucco was applied most thickly and correlate those areas precisely with the features that differ most dramatically between the inner and outer versions. And yet, and this is the thing that makes the story so strange, despite all of that accumulated knowledge, we still cannot say with genuine confidence what Nefertiti actually looked like, because the face the world sees is not the face that was originally carved, and the face that was originally carved stayed hidden for more than 3,000 years. There is also a third possibility, one that sidesteps the debate between propaganda and simple artistic process entirely. Perhaps the two faces were never in competition with each other. Perhaps they were never separate artistic statements. Perhaps the limestone portrait was simply the foundation, the structure from which the sculptor worked, and the stucco exterior was the completion. The hidden face was not meant to be seen independently. It was a beginning, not an end. a private substrate beneath a public surface. Had history unfolded differently, no one would ever have known it was there. The bust would have sat in its glass case in Berlin, admired and studied and celebrated, and the face inside would have remained invisible until the stone itself eventually turned to dust. But history did not unfold that way. A city was abandoned in the ancient world, and a workshop was sealed. A German archaeologist opened a crate in 1912. A physician placed a sculpture inside a CT scanner in 2007. And a face that had not been seen in over 3,000 years appeared on a screen in a Berlin hospital. The question that remains: here is what we are left with, after all the scanning and the scholarship and the debate. The most famous face in ancient history contains two faces. One that was made to be seen, one that was made to be hidden, one that presents an image of flawless, ageless, elevated beauty, one that shows a woman with slight lines at the corners of her mouth, a natural bump on her nose, and cheekbones that have not been sculpted into something beyond human. Which one is closer to the real Nefertiti? Was the outer face a deliberate act of image management, one of the oldest examples in human history of a powerful figure's appearance being curated for public consumption? Or was it simply the final stage of a sculptor's creative process, the natural result of working first in stone and then in a more flexible material? And underneath both of those questions is a deeper one, the one that is perhaps impossible to answer. Does it matter? When a face has shaped how billions of people across centuries have imagined an entire civilization, when that face has become one of the defining symbols of human beauty itself, does it matter whether it is a faithful likeness or a carefully constructed ideal? Perhaps the answer is yes, for the reason that truth always matters. If the inner face is closer to reality, then the real Nefertiti has been invisible to the world for her entire existence in the modern imagination. The woman who ruled alongside one of history's most radical pharaohs, who wielded power that most queens in history never came close to, who disappeared from the historical record in ways that have never been explained. That woman may have had her face transformed, her image perfected, and her actual appearance sealed away in a block of limestone underneath the version that the world would come to worship. There is something in that story that resonates well beyond the ancient world. We live in an age defined by curated images, by filters, adjustments, enhancements, and carefully managed public representations of faces that bear varying degrees of resemblance to the real people behind them. What the CT scan of 2007 revealed is that this instinct to refine, to idealize, to present a perfected version of a face rather than the actual one, is not modern. It is not a product of technology or social media or the pressures of the contemporary world. It is at least 3,300 years old. A sculptor in ancient Egypt, working in a workshop in a city that would be abandoned before most of its buildings were finished, made a deliberate choice. He carved a face in stone. Then he covered it. And the face he showed to the world was not quite the face he had first revealed in the rock. The woman inside, whoever she really was, has been waiting a very long time to be found.